She's just 22. She's carrying a small bag of food, smiling at a neighbor as she walks past. It's supposed to be another normal shift. But minutes later screams slice through the quiet street. A body lies motionless on the pavement. Blood dripping onto the doorstep she never meant to reach. And when police uncover who's responsible, the truth will leave everyone gasping. But what happened next shocked everyone. Bianca Wood lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where kids still played outside and people waved from their porches. She was hardworking, juggling her job as a delivery driver with night classes in business administration. Anthony Cooper lived just 2 blocks away. On the surface he was ordinary mid-30s, quiet, reserved. But under the surface, something darker simmered. The murder would shatter trust in this peaceful community. Neighbors would lock their doors at dusk. Parents would pull their children inside. Before we dive deeper, remember we post daily. Subscribe so you never miss a case. Bianca Wood's life was a rhythm of simple joys and determined steps forward. At just 22, she was the kind of young woman people noticed for her kindness before anything else. Neighbors remembered her as the girl who always had a smile ready, even on long delivery shifts. She'd wave at kids playing on sidewalks, greet dogs tied outside shops, and sometimes add a cheerful "stay safe" to strangers at the end of her rounds. She carried big dreams and a modest heart. By day, she pedaled her bike and carried takeout bags. By night, she sat hunched over textbooks, studying business administration. She had a plan: save every extra dollar, gather experience, and someday open a cafe of her own. A small place where people could feel the warmth she carried so effortlessly in her own presence. Her parents said she had a light that made ordinary days brighter. But alongside that light, there were shadows she never wanted to name. Friends later said Bianca had mentioned a man she sometimes delivered to, a man who unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite explain. She didn't describe outright threats. It wasn't that simple. It was the way he looked at her. The way he lingered at the door, eyes following her long after she turned to leave. She tried to laugh it off, telling a close friend, "Maybe he's just lonely. Maybe I'm imagining it." But the nervous tone in her voice suggested something deeper. That man was Anthony Cooper. Anthony had lived in the neighborhood for years. Some called him quiet. Others called him strange. He didn't join block parties. He didn't wave at passing cars. He was the kind of neighbor people mentioned only when asked, because there was nothing obvious to say except for the odd feeling you got when his gaze lingered too long. Curtains drawn in the middle of the day. Long pauses before answering the door. The sense of someone always watching. Bianca's younger brother remembered a night when she came home shaken. She confessed she hated delivering to that particular address. "It just doesn't feel right," she told him, hugging her arms close. He advised her to request reroutes, maybe swap shifts when his name appeared on the app. She nodded, promising she'd try. But promises are fragile things in the face of duty. Bianca believed in treating everyone kindly, even those who made her uncomfortable. She didn't want to be rude, didn't want to create tension. So she carried on. She kept riding her bike, kept smiling even when the unease grew. In the days leading up to that final night, neighbors swore they saw Anthony standing outside longer than usual, leaning against his doorway, watching. His presence became like a shadow stitched to the edge of Bianca's route. And then came the evening that changed everything. Another ordinary order pinged on Bianca's phone. The address flashed across her screen. She hesitated just for a moment. It was his house. Anthony Cooper's. She almost declined it. Almost swapped it with another driver. Almost. But she didn't. And that one small choice would lead her straight into the nightmare no one saw coming. The evening air carried that kind of quiet only found in suburbs after dinner. Streetlights blinked on one by one. Porch lights glowed warmly against the cooling dusk. Bianca's phone buzzed with the new order, and she balanced the small paper bag on her bike's handle as she pedaled down the familiar street. Neighbors would later say she looked as she always did, calm, polite, focused. She hopped off the bike, straightened her jacket, and walked up the cracked path toward the house she dreaded most. The bag of food rustled softly in her hands. Anthony Cooper's porch light was on. The blinds were drawn. To anyone watching, it looked like another ordinary delivery. But what happened at that doorway would turn the quiet neighborhood into a crime scene. At 7:12 p.m., Bianca knocked. The sound was sharp against the stillness. Pause. Then the door creaked open. What happened next, no one saw clearly. But neighbors heard it. Mrs. Jensen, who lived across the street, described it later. It was sudden. A scream so raw, so sharp, I thought a fox was caught in the bushes. Then another sound, like something heavy hitting the ground. My stomach sank. I knew it wasn't an animal. Inside, Bianca's bag slipped from her grip. Fries spilled across the floor. A soda cup tipped, fizzing as it soaked into the carpet. Anthony lunged. The struggle was short, brutal, and silent except for Bianca's cries. When it was over, she collapsed against the threshold. Her body half inside, half out, her lifeless eyes reflecting the porch light above. Blood spread in a jagged trail down the wooden steps. Anthony didn't linger. He stepped over her as if she were nothing more than a broken object. Then he vanished into the night, leaving his door ajar and the house eerily quiet. By 7:18 p.m., the first emergency call came in. "There's a girl, she's on the ground, she's not moving." The caller's voice trembled, panicked as neighbors rushed out to their lawns. Sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights splashed against the houses as police cruisers screeched to a halt. Officers shouted for people to stay back. Yellow tape went up. The once safe street was transformed into a corridor of flashing lights and whispers. Bianca lay motionless, her delivery receipt still clutched in her hand. On it, the name Anthony Cooper was written in bold print. It was the first clue. The first thread in unraveling the horror that had just taken place. As paramedics worked frantically, neighbors stood frozen. Some wept openly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. One whispered, "That could have been my daughter." The night stretched heavy, suffocating. The silence between sirens seemed louder than any scream. People hugged their children tighter. They locked their doors. What no one knew then was that the man responsible was already slipping through shadows, desperate and unpredictable. The hunt for Anthony Cooper had just begun. Detectives arrived on the scene just after the paramedics pronounced Bianca gone. The sight chilled even the most seasoned officers. A young woman's body lying in the open, the delivery bag ripped, food scattered like evidence of innocence lost. And clutched in her stiffening hand the delivery receipt with one name written clear as day. Anthony Cooper. He was no stranger to the neighborhood, but to the police, his record painted a darker portrait. Past complaints from women who claimed he followed them. A restraining order filed years earlier in another county. Incidents dismissed as misunderstandings. But put together, they formed a trail of red flags that suddenly mattered far too much. Investigators pieced together Bianca's last movements. Her phone log showed her final location pinged outside Anthony's house at 7:12 p.m. Less than 10 minutes later, the first neighbor dialed 911. The timeline was razor sharp. Inside the house, detectives found the scene of a struggle. A chair knocked over. Glass shattered near the hallway. A soda stain spreading across the carpet. But Anthony himself was gone. No sign of forced escape, no vehicle missing. He had walked out on foot, disappearing into the dark streets. At first, theories swirled. Could it have been a random attack? Was someone else inside that house? Detectives worked every angle, combing for DNA, fingerprints, fibers. The evidence pointed back to one man. But then, his trail went cold. Witnesses gave conflicting statements. One neighbor swore she saw Anthony moving quickly toward the woods, a backpack slung over his shoulder. Another insisted he was at the bus stop, pacing nervously. Surveillance cameras picked up a blur of movement. Was it him, or just someone passing through? Each lead twisted into another knot. Meanwhile, the neighborhood fell into fear. News vans lined the streets. Journalists whispered into cameras. Police are on the hunt for a local man accused in the brutal murder of 22-year-old delivery driver Bianca Wood. Parents refused to let their children walk to school. Every stranger became a potential threat. Detectives worked day and night, mapping Anthony's possible escape routes. They learned he had recently lost his job at a warehouse. They found old journals filled with obsessive scribbles, fantasies about women, loneliness, resentment. The obsession with Bianca seemed to have grown over weeks, maybe months. But still, where was he? Then a breakthrough. Security footage from a convenience store miles from the crime scene showed Anthony buying bottled water and bandages. His clothes were dirty. His hands wrapped hastily with gauze. His eyes darted to the door again and again, like a hunted animal. The timestamp was 2 days after Bianca's murder. He was alive, on the run. That single clip electrified the case. Now police had proof. He hadn't vanished completely, he was hiding. And the manhunt to bring Anthony Cooper into custody was about to reach its most critical stage. But how far would he go to stay hidden? And how much darker would this story get before it finally ended? The footage of Anthony Cooper at that convenience store shifted everything. Until then, he was a shadow, a rumor whispered across backyards and in late-night news updates. Now he was real, visible, desperate. Detectives immediately mapped the area around the store. They pulled every scrap of surveillance within a 10-mile radius: gas stations, motels, bus depots. A pattern began to emerge. Anthony wasn't leaving town. He was circling the edges, clinging to places where no one would notice him. Tips poured in. A man resembling him spotted near the riverbank. Another sighting outside an abandoned warehouse. Each call sent squads racing across the county. Each time he slipped away. But then, a hunter checking his cabin deep in the woods stumbled upon something chilling. A sleeping bag. Empty food wrappers. Torn clothes that matched the grainy convenience store footage. And scrawled on a notebook page just one line: "She wouldn't stop looking at me." Police surrounded the area, knowing Anthony had been there recently. Dogs picked up his scent. The chase through the forest lasted hours. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Officers with flashlights moved like phantoms between trees. By dawn they found him. Huddled inside an old shed, filthy, exhausted, his hands still raw from self-bandaged wounds. When officers burst in, he didn't fight. He whispered only one thing: "She smiled at me. She wanted me there." That delusion was shattered in court. The trial revealed Anthony's disturbing history. Former co-workers testified about his volatile temper. Women spoke of how he followed them home, how he wouldn't take no for an answer. Doctors described untreated mental illness, paranoia, and obsession. For Bianca's family, each day in court was a fresh wound. They sat through descriptions of her final moments. They listened as prosecutors detailed the evidence: the delivery receipt, the DNA on the spilled soda cup, the blood on Anthony's clothes. The defense tried to argue insanity. They painted Anthony as a man lost in his own mind, unable to understand right from wrong. But the jury saw through it. They saw the patterns, the choices, the premeditation. The verdict came swift and heavy: guilty of murder in the first degree. Anthony Cooper was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For the community, the sentencing was a relief, but not a victory. Parents still glanced over their shoulders. Young women carried pepper spray on delivery shifts. The sense of safety that once defined the neighborhood never fully returned. Bianca's parents spoke quietly outside the courthouse. Her mother said, "We'll never get her back." But if her story makes one person take their safety seriously, if it makes one person trust their instincts, then maybe her light still shines. To honor her, the town created the Bianca Wood Memorial Scholarship, funding young women who, like her, dreamed of building something of their own. A small step to turn unimaginable pain into lasting purpose. Anthony Cooper's obsession ended Bianca's life, but it could not silence her memory. Her story lingers as both a warning and a reminder of what was lost. Anthony Cooper's crime wasn't sudden rage. It was the result of a dangerous psychological spiral, years in the making. Experts studying his behavior identified patterns consistent with erotomania, a delusional disorder where someone convinces themselves another person is secretly in love with them. In Anthony's case, Bianca's polite professionalism as a delivery worker, her smiles, her brief eye contact were twisted in his mind into signals of affection. What she intended as kindness, he interpreted as desire. When reality didn't match the fantasy, the delusion turned hostile. Psychologists call this the flip. The moment when obsession transforms into anger, when the person who was idolized becomes the imagined enemy. Anthony's background fueled the escalation. Years of social isolation, failed relationships, and job losses fed his paranoia. Instead of addressing his loneliness, he constructed an alternate world where Bianca was the answer to his emptiness. Every interaction became proof. Every smile, every knock at his door, a sign. And when Bianca didn't reciprocate, when she treated him the same way she treated every customer, his fragile fantasy collapsed. The rejection wasn't spoken, but in his mind, it was louder than words. That collapse became the trigger for violence. Criminal psychologists warn about these patterns. Obsession often begins subtly: prolonged staring, waiting at places the victim frequents, unwanted conversations that feel off. Too often, victims dismiss these as harmless quirks. Communities shrug them off as odd behavior. But cases like Anthony's show how quickly fixation can escalate into tragedy. Anthony also showed traits of narcissistic rage, the inability to accept being ignored or denied. For him, Bianca wasn't a person with her own life. She was a symbol, a possession. When she didn't play the role he had scripted in his mind, he lashed out to regain control, even if it meant destroying her completely. In court, psychiatrists testified that Anthony's lack of remorse further highlighted this mindset. He didn't apologize. He didn't express regret. Instead, he clung to his warped narrative, that Bianca wanted him, that she provoked his obsession. This kind of self-serving delusion is what makes similar offenders so dangerous. They can't separate reality from fantasy, and they justify their violence as inevitable. The lesson experts stress is clear. Never ignore boundary violations. What starts as strange can become lethal if left unchecked. Bianca sensed something was wrong. She even told her brother she felt unsafe. But like so many victims, she chose kindness over confrontation, and that decision cost her life. Anthony Cooper's psychology is a reminder that obsession isn't passion, it's control. And when mixed with loneliness, anger, and untreated mental illness, it can become a storm that ends in blood. Bianca Wood's life was simple, hopeful, and full of dreams. She wanted to open a cafe, build something of her own, and bring people together with the same warmth she carried in her smile. But in one night, those dreams were stolen. Not by chance, not by fate, but by the obsession of a man who turned her kindness into a weapon against her. Her story is a reminder: safety can vanish in an instant. The everyday can become deadly. And sometimes the people who seem quiet, who seem ordinary, carry the darkest storms inside. For Bianca's family, justice brought no comfort. For her community, the scars of that night still remain. But for us, her story is a warning we cannot ignore. Trust your instincts. Speak up about red flags, because silence can cost everything. On Unforgiven Crimes, we tell these stories not to exploit tragedy, but to make sure victims like Bianca are never forgotten. Subscribe now and don't miss our next case. And now, we leave you with this question. Do you think Anthony Cooper's violence was inevitable, or could someone have stopped him before it was too late? Tell us in the comments below.